Clara Sterling ripped the titanium schematic ledger directly in half right in front of an elderly woman leaning heavily on an oak cane. She didn't fold it. She didn't set it aside. She ripped it once, a sharp, violent tear that sounded like a rifle crack in the high-ceilinged lobby, and then she ripped it again. She kept tearing until the blueprints and the attached $5 million wire verification were reduced to a pile of jagged, gray confetti. Then, with a slow, deliberate tilt of her wrists, she let the pieces drop onto the polished epoxy floor of the Apex turbine fabrication facility, like they were nothing more than toxic waste. "I know exactly who you are, Jonah," Clara declared, her voice pitched loud enough to echo off the steel girders and ring across the entire assembly floor. "And I know for an undeniable fact you don't have $5 million to your name. You couldn't even keep the power running in our starter home." The man standing on the other side of the high bay terminal didn't raise his voice. He didn't flinch. Instead, he reached down with a steady, calloused hand to steady his mother, whose knuckles had gone chalk white against the head of her cane the second that paper tore. He looked across the steel counter at the woman behind the desk. A woman he had once shared a bed with, shared a mortgage with, and spent 6 brutal, unforgiving years of his early life trying to satisfy. He spoke quietly, his tone flat, even and terrifyingly measured, like an engineer reading off a critical system failure report. "You just made the single most expensive mistake of your entire career, Clara." Security officers were already unhooking their holsters from the perimeter entrance, moving in on Clara's signal. And that is the exact second the automated bay doors hissed open, and Director Marcus Thorne, the regional executive over the entire defense grid, walked onto the shop floor, saw shredded titanium blueprints littering his floor, and lost every drop of color in his face. "Mr. Vance," Marcus choked out, his voice cracking. And then Director Thorne said something Clara Sterling never in her wildest nightmares expected to hear, directed at the man she had thrown away 12 years ago for having no future. He called him sir. Now, to understand why those torn blueprints triggered a multi-million-dollar legal nuclear reaction, and why Clara's smug smile was about to turn into a life-destroying nightmare, you have to understand the secret Jonah Vance had been keeping for 12 straight years. A secret that was about to be exposed right in front of 20 silent eyewitnesses. Jonah Vance had learned decades ago that the industrial world makes up its mind about a man before he ever opens his mouth. He learned it first, and most painfully, from the woman who swore to stand by him until death. Jonah was 44 years old now. For the last 3 years, his entire life had revolved around a single, non-negotiable mission: taking care of his mother, Helena. They lived together in the same small, weathered cottage on the ridge overlooking the industrial valley where Jonah had been raised. Helena had brought him up alone after his father died in a foundry accident when Jonah was just 9 years old. To keep a roof over their heads, Helena cleaned commercial machine shops by day and hand-stitched leather welding gaskets by night. She spent every waking hour making sure her son had proper boots, clean calipers, and engineering textbooks, even when it meant she went to bed in a room with no heat during the peak of winter. Jonah never forgot that debt. It was the sole reason he was standing in the Apex fabrication hub with a certified $5 million acquisition wire on a clear Tuesday afternoon. 12 years earlier, Jonah had been married to Clara. They had met in their mid-20s, back when Jonah was sleeping on a worn canvas cot in a rented tool shed above a dry dock, spending 20 hours a day trying to turn $40,000 of saved wages and a stubborn, unproven titanium welding patent into something that could support a family. In the beginning, Clara claimed she loved the ambition. She liked telling her friends about the late nights, the blueprint sketches, and the fiery passion Jonah had when he talked about high-pressure turbine dynamics like they were already flying. But 3 years into the marriage, reality set in. The mortgage on their small starter house began falling behind. Jonah's prototype was stalling in compliance testing. The company was bleeding money, and the payoff felt light years away. Something inside Clara turned cold and cynical. "You're 32 years old, Jonah, and you're still playing with metal scraps in a shed," she told him one night, tossing a stack of overdue utility bills onto the kitchen table. "I need a man who can actually provide for a family today. Not a dreamer who's going to make me waste my youth waiting for a miracle that is never going to happen." 3 months later, she packed her bags and moved out. She left him for a man named Julian Garrick, a polished corporate logistics coordinator with a guaranteed salary, an expense account, and a suburban home twice the size of the one she and Jonah had struggled to keep warm. She legally dropped Jonah's name, took her maiden name back, and eventually became Clara Garrick once the wedding was finalized. Jonah didn't fight the divorce. He didn't fight over the house, the furniture, or the debts. He didn't fight much of anything in those dark months, except for the technology itself. That was where every ounce of his remaining life force went. He never told a soul in the valley how close he came to total destruction during the 2 years that followed. He moved back into his mother's spare bedroom, set up his computer on her kitchen table, ate whatever simple meals she set in front of him without complaint, and worked until his eyes bled. And then, the gamble paid off. A low-profile aerospace defense startup bought an early licensing stake in his heat-resistant turbine blade design, a patent the broader industry ignored until suddenly, overnight, every jet engine manufacturer on Earth desperately needed it to meet military specifications. Jonah never reached out to Clara to brag. He never posted about his sudden wealth online. There was no point. They hadn't spoken in over a decade. Through small-town industry gossip, he heard vaguely that Clara and Julian had gone through a bitter divorce of their own, and that she had landed a middle management quality assurance job somewhere in the regional manufacturing sector. Gossip like that was irrelevant to Jonah. He had built a life that had zero dependence on her validation. He measured his success by a single metric. Were the people who sacrificed for him fully taken care of? He still drove the same dented gray utility truck he'd owned since before the divorce. He still wore the same worn canvas work jacket, soft, faded, and frayed at the elbows, the exact jacket Clara used to tell him made him look like a homeless laborer. He kept wearing it not out of spite, but because it fit, it was durable, and he had zero interest in wearing an expensive suit just to prove his bank account to strangers. That very morning, a $5 million wire transfer had officially cleared into Jonah's corporate ledger. The primary buyout fee from his defense patent. He already knew where every single penny was going. Half of it, $2.5 million, was set aside to cover his mother's emergency spinal fusion surgery and specialized post-op rehabilitation care. Helena had been quietly living in agony for over a year, hiding her pain behind a smile, because she didn't want to be a financial burden on her son. The other half was meant to seed an endowment fund for local trade apprentices, kids growing up in broken homes who had the talent for engineering but lacked the money to buy their first set of tools. Jonah had brought his mother along that afternoon because the Apex facility was directly on the route to her cardiologist's office, and because Helena had insisted on coming inside. "I want to see it, Jonah," she had whispered in the truck. "I want to see you finally sign the papers that make all those dark nights in the shed worth it." Neither of them expected the errand to take more than 5 minutes. But as Jonah pushed open the heavy industrial doors of the Apex facility, he had no idea he was walking straight into an explosive trap that had been quietly arming itself for 4 months. The Apex turbine fabrication plant was a massive, high-bay facility filled with the low, reverberating hum of heavy CNC machinery and the sharp smell of cutting fluid. Jonah had banked his commercial accounts through Apex's parent corporate network for 15 years, long before his venture firm had a name that carried weight in Washington. He knew the floor layout by heart. He knew where his mother could sit comfortably on a padded lobby bench while he submitted his physical wire verification forms. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have known until his eyes landed on the polished brass nameplate resting on the lead desk, was that Clara Sterling had been transferred to this exact regional plant 4 months earlier as the chief QA and administrative compliance manager. It was a statistical fluke. Their paths had never crossed here before. As far as Jonah was concerned, this was simply his standard local corporate hub. He saw her name on the plate before she noticed him. Clara Sterling, lead compliance officer. For a split second, standing near the glass entrance with his mother's frail hand resting lightly on his arm, Jonah considered turning around and walking out. It would have been easy. He could have driven 30 miles to the downtown headquarters. He had no desire to rake up old ashes or create an awkward scene. But Helena was exhausted. Her cardiology appointment was in 40 minutes. The surgery needed to be scheduled by 5 p.m., and Jonah Vance was not a man who rearranged his life to dodge temporary discomfort. He took a breath, adjusted his canvas jacket, and walked toward the console. Clara looked up from her computer monitor as the heavy boots approached. Jonah watched the recognition hit her face in real time. First came the slight widening of her eyes, a flicker of pure, unadulterated shock. Then came a dark, unreadable shadow, replaced almost instantly by an armor of hyper-professional condescension. "Jonah," she said. Her voice was cold, thin, and entirely devoid of warmth. "It's been a long time." "Clara," Jonah replied, keeping his vocal cords entirely flat. "I didn't realize you were managing this branch." "For months," she said. Her eyes immediately began traveling over him, assessing him the exact same way she used to do across their kitchen table 12 years ago when she was calculating his worth. Her gaze slid down his faded canvas jacket, lingered on the greasy collar, drifted to his mother's worn wooden cane, and finally shot through the front glass window to fixate on Jonah's dented gray utility truck parked in the executive space. Jonah could practically hear the gears turning in her head. In less than 3 seconds, Clara arrived at the exact conclusion she had held a decade earlier. Jonah Vance was still a broke, struggling garage mechanic who couldn't make ends meet. "What are you doing here, Jonah?" she asked, her tone shifting into the patronizing register reserved for lost visitors. "This isn't a retail shop. We handle high-volume commercial and defense compliance." Helena stepped forward slightly, offering a soft, polite nod. "Hello, Clara." Clara's eyes flicked to the elderly woman. A brief flash of genuine embarrassment crossed her face, a remnant of guilt for abandoning the family, but she smothered it immediately. "Helena," Clara said stiffly. Then she turned her attention back to Jonah. "State your business, Jonah. I have a shift change audit in 10 minutes. I'm here to process a high-value clearance deposit and verify an incoming wire," Jonah said. He pulled the crisp, certified $5 million ledger draft from his inner pocket and laid it flat on the steel counter. Clara glanced down at the document. The moment her eyes registered the number of zeros printed on the bold line, $5 million, she stopped breathing. She picked up the paper, holding it between 2 fingernails like it was contaminated. Then she looked up at Jonah, a sneering smirk spreading across her lips. "Is this supposed to be funny, Jonah?" "There's nothing funny about it, Clara. I was married to you for 6 years, she snapped, dropping the professional facade entirely as her voice rose, attracting the attention of several nearby technicians. "I know your tax returns by heart. I know you couldn't keep up with a $400 mortgage payment on a house that didn't even have central air. And you want me to stand here and believe you are depositing a $5 million corporate settlement." A young junior compliance officer named Maya Lin, working at the adjacent terminal, heard the commotion and reached toward the document. "Clara, I can run the primary routing number through the National Clearing Ledger. It takes 10 seconds. "I've got this, Maya. Step back," Clara barked, waving her hand dismissively without taking her eyes off Jonah. Maya hesitated, looking between Jonah's steady, stoic posture and Clara's escalating hostility. Sensing that this had shifted into something personal and dangerous, Maya slowly backed away, but she kept her fingers hovering over her terminal keyboard. By now, 6 floor engineers, shop foremen, and visiting contractors had stopped what they were doing. The tension in the lobby was thick enough to choke on. 2 truck drivers sitting on the waiting bench pulled out their phones, sensing an explosive viral moment unfolding. Clara leaned over the counter, dropping her voice into a sharp, venomous hiss designed to slice straight to Jonah's bone. "You couldn't afford to take me to dinner on our 5th anniversary, Jonah. You expect me to buy the story that some magical tech buyout made you a multimillionaire? And you dragged your poor, sick mother in here as a prop to try and make your little fraud look believable." Helena's grip on her cane trembled. "Clara, please. That is completely unfair and you know it. With all due respect, Helena, you don't get to lecture me about fairness." Clara shot back, her temper flaring wildly in front of the audience. "You two spent years living in a fantasy world, believing his little pipe dreams were going to amount to something while I suffered." Jonah's jaw clenched. The muscles along his neck tightened like iron cables. He hadn't reacted when she insulted his truck. He hadn't reacted when she mocked his jacket. But watching this woman insult the 90-pound mother who had nearly worked herself to death to feed him was the absolute limit. "I am going to offer you one chance to do your job, Clara," Jonah said. His voice was dangerously low, vibrating with a force that made the contractors in the lobby sit up straight. Call the issuing defense clearinghouse directly. The phone number is printed on the top right header. It will take your system 3 minutes to verify every single cent. Clara looked at the document, then looked at Jonah. In her mind, logic had completely detached from reality. She was blinded by 12 years of self-justification. If Jonah Vance was rich, if Jonah Vance was a successful, powerful innovator, then her decision to abandon him for Julian Garrick was the biggest, most foolish mistake of her entire life. She couldn't accept that. Her ego physically refused to process a reality where Jonah succeeded without her. I don't need to call anyone, Clara hissed, her face contorting with malicious triumph. I know who you are, Jonah. I know what you're capable of, and more importantly, I know what you're not capable of. This is a forged instrument. You are attempting to commit high-level financial fraud in my facility. Then get your regional director out here, Jonah demanded. There is no director here today. I am the head of compliance on this floor, Clara declared, her voice reaching a crescendo. And I am putting an end to this pathetic little performance right now. She held the $5 million ledger draft up in the air for the entire shop floor to see. People like you, Clara spat, staring straight into Jonah's eyes, do not get to walk in here and pretend to be important. Crack. With a sudden, violent twist of her hands, Clara ripped the certified ledger document clean down the middle. The sound echoed through the high bay industrial shop like a gunshot. Before anyone could even gasp, Clara folded the split pages together, gripped them again, and tore them across the grain. Crack. She did it a third time, shredding the multi-million-dollar verification document into tiny, irrecoverable strips of gray pulp. Then, with a cold, disgusted sneer, she opened her hands and let the shreds rain down onto the floor, scattering across the polished epoxy right at the toe of Jonah's work boots. The lobby went entirely, suffocatingly silent. Even the distant hum of the CNC lathes seemed to drop an octave. Helena gasped, her body swaying forward as she instinctively reached toward the falling paper, her cane wobbling dangerously on the slick floor. Jonah, the surgery paper. Jonah caught his mother under her arm in a flash, lifting her back into a secure, upright position with effortless strength. He held her close, refusing to allow her to kneel on a factory floor to clean up the mess his ex-wife had made out of pure malice. Slowly, Jonah raised his head. His eyes locked onto Clara. There was no anger in his face now. No heat. No rage. Just a cold, terrifying emptiness that made Clara's breath catch in her throat. You just made the most expensive mistake of your career, Clara, Jonah repeated, his voice carrying a chilling, absolute certainty. Clara's hands began to tremble slightly, a sudden, involuntary physical response to the sheer intensity in Jonah's eyes. But she forced a nervous, mocking laugh and grabbed her desk radio. Security. Jensen, get over here now, she screamed into the microphone. I have a suspect attempting to utter a forged $5 million instrument. I want him cuffed, I want a full fraud record logged, and I want him and his trespasser mother physically removed from my building. Kobe Jensen, a tall, heavy-set floor security guard, hurried over from his post near the shipping gates. He looked at the torn paper on the floor, looked at the elderly woman leaning on her cane, and then looked at Jonah, who was standing completely still, making no aggressive movements whatsoever. Jensen hesitated, his hands hovering near his belt. Ma'am, is there a physical threat? I gave you an order, Jensen. Clara shrieked, her voice cracking under the pressure of her own escalating panic. Escort them out or I will have your badge for insubordination. Jensen took a hesitant step forward. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step toward the exit. Do not touch my mother, Jonah said quietly to the guard. And do not ruin your own career following an illegal order from a manager who hasn't checked her system. Jensen froze. Something in Jonah's command authority told the guard that if he put a hand on this man, he was walking off a cliff he couldn't see. Helena was trembling now, tears forming in the corners of her eyes as she clutched Jonah's arm. Jonah, please let's just go. We can find another way. We aren't going anywhere, Mom, Jonah said softly. And right at that exact fraction of a second, before Clara could scream at the guard again, before Jensen could make a move, and before the crowd could react, the heavy glass doors at the main entrance opened with a loud pneumatic hiss. Director Marcus Thorne walked into the lobby. Marcus Thorne was a formidable man in his late 50s, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, holding a leather briefing portfolio under his arm. He was the senior regional operations director for the entire parent defense conglomerate, a man who answered directly to board members and military procurement officers. 15 years earlier, Marcus had been a middle management loan officer who had taken a massive personal risk by approving Jonah Vance's very first microloan for a small lathe setup in a garage. Over the next decade and a half, Marcus had watched Jonah transform from a desperate, brilliant young mechanic into an unshakable titan of metallurgical engineering. Marcus knew better than almost anyone on earth what Jonah Vance was worth, both financially and strategically. Marcus had been at a corporate defense conference downstate and had decided to make an unannounced stop at the Apex facility on his drive home to sign off on a routine regional audit. He took 3 steps into the lobby, took one look at the crowd gathered around the desk, saw shredded paper littering the floor, and saw Jonah Vance standing under guard next to his mother. Marcus went completely, utterly white. "Mr. Vance?" Marcus blurted out, dropping his leather portfolio straight onto the floor. He shoved past security guard Jensen, practically sprinting across the lobby floor, his face twisted in a look of absolute horror. "Mr. Vance." "Sir." Marcus gasped, coming to a dead stop in front of Jonah, and looking down at the torn pieces of paper at his boots. What in God's name is happening here?" "Sir, I am so sorry." Clara stood behind the counter, completely bewildered by her superior's reaction. She picked up her radio, leaning over the counter. "Director Thorne, you don't need to apologize to this man," Clara interjected, her voice filled with desperate confidence. "I caught him red-handed. He walked in here claiming he had a $5 million defense payout clearing draft, and given his history as a failed garage mechanic, I caught the fraud before it went through." Marcus slowly turned his head toward Clara. The look on Director Thorne's face wasn't just anger. It was catastrophic, apocalyptic fury. "Do you have any idea who you are talking to, Clara?" Marcus asked, his voice dropping into a register that made the entire lobby go cold. "I know exactly who he is." Clara snapped back, blinded by her own desperation. "He is my ex-husband. He couldn't even pay an electrical bill 12 years ago." "Then you are even more profoundly ignorant than I thought," Marcus roared, his voice exploding across the entire high bay facility, causing floor technicians 50 yards away to drop their tools. "Jonah Vance doesn't need to forge a $5 million check, you fool. Jonah Vance's firm holds the primary structural patents for every single turbine blade this facility manufactures. His corporate accounts hold over $85 million in liquid capital with our parent bank, and his defense contracts fund this entire regional division." The word $85 million hung in the air like an unexploded bomb. The entire lobby went dead silent. Clara's jaw dropped. The color drained from her skin so fast she looked like a corpse standing behind the desk. Her knees visibly buckled, and she had to grab the edge of the steel terminal to stop herself from collapsing onto the floor. "Wait," Clara whispered, her voice trembling violently as her eyes darted frantically toward Jonah. No, that's impossible. He drives a truck." "It is not only possible, it has been reality for 7 years," Marcus yelled, stepping right up to Clara's console. "You didn't catch a fraud, Clara. You just verbally abused our firm's most important client, insulted his elderly mother, falsely threatened him with law enforcement, and shredded a certified corporate clearing document in front of 20 witnesses." Marcus turned to the security guard. "Jensen, step back from Mr. Vance right now." Jensen immediately retreated 3 steps, snapping into an upright posture. "Yes, Director." Marcus turned back to Jonah, his hands shaking as he bowed his head in deep humility. "Jonah, Mr. Vance, I don't even know what to say. If you pull your accounts and your patents from Apex over this, our entire facility will be shut down by the board before the end of the month." Jonah didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He didn't laugh in Clara's face. He stood there, towering over the counter, looking down at his ex-wife with an expression of quiet, profound pity. "I didn't come here to ruin your facility, Marcus," Jonah said, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "I came here to deposit a wire draft so my mother could have her spinal surgery scheduled today. But your compliance manager decided that her personal hatred for who I was 12 years ago gave her the right to destroy my documents and humiliate an old woman." Clara was hyperventilating now, clutching her chest as she looked at Jonah. "Jonah, please. I didn't know. I thought." "You didn't think, Clara," Jonah said coldly. "You assumed. Just like you assumed 12 years ago." Within 30 minutes, the entire facility was plunged into a high-level corporate lockdown. Director Marcus Thorne personally escorted Jonah and Helena into his private executive suite, ordering hot tea for Helena and immediately opening a direct, secure line to the bank's central clearinghouse. Within 10 minutes, the shredded $5 million wire draft was voided, a brand new digital clearance certificate was generated, and the funds were officially locked into Helena's medical escrow account. Meanwhile, downstairs on the shop floor, corporate internal affairs investigators arrived. Maya Lin, the junior compliance officer who Clara had ordered to step back, stepped forward and handed investigators her terminal logs. She revealed that Clara had repeatedly bypassed standard electronic verification protocols over the past 4 months, whenever she personally disliked a customer or contractor. Further investigation into Clara's personnel record revealed a trail of hidden, informal complaints at her previous job site, complaints she had quietly buried using her managerial authority. The legal hammer fell with ruthless precision. Immediate termination. Clara Sterling was escorted out of the Apex turbine fabrication building by security guards less than 2 hours later, walking past the same floor technicians who had watched her shred Jonah's papers. Licensing revocation. Her professional compliance certifications were permanently revoked by the Regional Engineering Board for gross misconduct and intentional destruction of legal documentation. Legal charges. The local prosecutor filed formal charges against Clara for filing a false criminal police report and malicious destruction of property. Civil restitution. Facing massive legal fees and zero income, Clara was forced to liquidate her personal savings to settle civil claims brought against her. When news of Clara's catastrophic public downfall reached her second ex-husband, Julian Garrick, he reportedly told colleagues, "Clara always thought she was the smartest person in the room. She destroyed a man who loved her because she couldn't wait for him to build a foundation." 3 months later, the morning sun broke warm over the valley as Jonah's dented gray utility truck pulled back into the parking lot of the Apex facility. Jonah walked around to the passenger side, opening the door for his mother. Helena stepped down onto the asphalt. Her spine surgery had been a total success. The pain that had plagued her for years was completely gone, and her walk was steady, fluid, and strong. She carried her wooden cane in her hand, using it more out of habit than necessity. They walked through the heavy glass doors of the Apex lobby together. Jonah was still wearing his signature canvas jacket with the soft, faded elbows. The lobby had changed entirely. Over the wall near the main entrance hung a massive, polished bronze plaque reading, "The Helena Vance Apprenticeship Foundation," providing tools, training, and open doors for the next generation of innovators. Maya Lin, who had been officially promoted to head of compliance to replace Clara, walked over with a warm smile, holding a leather folder. "Mr. Vance, Mrs. Vance," Maya said respectfully. "The first class of 12 trade apprentices has officially cleared their background checks. They're waiting in the high bay conference room to meet you." Kobe Jensen, standing at his security post, gave Jonah a sharp, respectful nod as they walked past. As they walked toward the conference room, Helena stopped, looking over at a young, 19-year-old apprentice in grease-stained coveralls who was sitting at the intake desk, opening his very first commercial tool account, treated with total respect, dignity, and care by the staff. Helena turned to her son, her eyes shining with pride. "Jonah," she asked quietly, "after what Clara did to us in this lobby, why didn't you just pull your patents and shut this place down?" Jonah looked at the young apprentice at the desk, then looked at his mother. "Because, Mom," Jonah replied softly, "destroying a building is easy. Anyone with anger can tear something down. Building a door that stays open for everyone, even when the world tried to slam it in your face, that's the real work." Helena smiled, squeezing her son's arm tight. Together, mother and son walked into the conference room to change 12 young lives forever. If you were standing in that lobby the day Clara tore up those blueprints, would you have stayed silent behind your phone? Or would you have been the one to step up and defend Jonah and his mother? A person should never need an $85 million net worth to be treated with basic human decency. And the people who once claimed to love us should be the last ones to forget that. If this story reminded you of the power of staying humble and standing up for what's right, hit that subscribe button right now, leave a comment below with your thoughts, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.